Julie, are you on?
I am.
Okay, there you go.
Calling to order the Minnehaha County Election Review Committee. And I would like to have a call of the roll.
Chairman Danielson,
Here.
Joel, Aaron, excuse me, Joel, Deborah,
Here.
Lori,
Here.
Julie,
Here.
Sue,
Here.
Kia.
Here.
I wanted to make a note that the agenda packets are outside the door, and there's also some information that's on the table next to the AutoMark machine that we'll be possibly referring to in the course of today. And so you'll be able to pick up that. And I wanted to make a note to the public that, well, you'll have an opportunity for public input at the beginning of the meeting in a few moments. You may bring up any issue during this period, and we ask if you're addressing a specific item on the agenda, please wait until that item is for public comment. When addressing the Election Review Committee, please step up to the podium in front of us and state your name for the record into the microphone. The Minnehaha County Commission, Auditor Bob Litz, and South Dakota Secretary of State Chantel Krebs have each appointed a member of this committee to identify, review, and help with the solutions to issues surrounding our recent elections. This is our fourth of 5 planned meetings we are conducting to help the Commission, the County Auditor, and the public with reviewing the election process. And I ask for an approval of the agenda for today's meeting. And Robert, will you call the roll?
Bruce,
Yes?
Joel, here, Deborah,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Kia.
Yes.
And now I'm asking for an approval of the February 6th meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
Second.
The roll, please.
I would note that I received an email from Lori earlier this morning to make one change, and that is last sentence that referred to votes counted south of 57th Street being counted in Clinton County. So that line will be struck, and I've also received a couple of other comments following the draft minutes that I put out a couple of days ago, and those comments have been reflected.
Thank you, Robert.
Bruce,
Yes?
Joel, Deborah,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Kia.
Yes.
It's time now for the part of the meeting where we'd like to have any of the members of the public be able to come up to the microphone and express any concerns or comments or ask us to look into any additional areas. Thank you.
My name is Joy Howe, and I am from Brandon, South Dakota. And I just want to have you picture something with me for a minute. There's a room here. I don't know if it has any windows or not.
I'm sorry.
Joel, can you put your microphone down?
I don't know if this window has. This room
Thank you
has
very
any
much.
windows. I assume it has a door, perhaps. But say election night, all the ballots are taken into this room, and say 4 or 5 people who all work at Raven Industries go in there, count the ballots, and then underneath the door they slide out the count. Would you take that and certify? Would you?
Is
Yes
that a
or no?
question to me?
That's a question to Bob Litz.
What do you mean when I certify? What is
Could-
that?
Would you say
we-
that this
could-
is the correct count?
With, without, what's that? Could I ask you once again to kind of clarify? We're having an issue up here, so I'd like to, could you clarify where you're going with it? Just so I can follow you. I appreciate this.
Okay. This room is closed. 5 people are in there counting the ballots. Okay? You're not watching it. They're counting the ballots behind closed doors. When they are done counting, they've written on a sheet of paper what the count is. They slide it under the door. Bob Litz, or auditor of whatever county we're talking about, takes that and says, here's the count. Would you certify that count?
Well, I'd just like you to know that's certainly just not the way it works. And, you know, we have a
Absolutely. Sir?
No, I would not. There's your answer.
Okay. That is exactly what we have when we have our ballots counted in a machine. That is the elephant in this whole discussion, is that those machines count in secret. Not a single one of you watch those ballots being counted, look at those ballots, verify those ballots. You stick them into a machine owned by a company with dubious ownership and say, what they say the count is what the count is. It is not a public count. And we are guaranteed a public count. And I spoke to people in our auditor's office. I said, you have a public count. Yes, the public can come down, but there's not much to see. You're right, there is nothing to see. We do not get to see those ballots counted publicly in front of us. That is the only way you can verify an election. It has been stolen from us by 4 companies who count every ballot in this country. And I do not believe our count is correct. Any computer person will tell you, completely hackable, completely programmable. It's a proven fact. And we insist on spending $217,000 to get more machines to take our elections away from us even further. Shame on us. Shame on you auditors for stealing our elections. It's the one thing that we have as a free people, is that we get to pick the people who make the laws for us. And we have had it taken away. If I get a judge's permission to pull those ballot boxes, am I going to get the same count? And have them counted by hand by the people of this community? Will you tell me that you will? Under oath, you will get the same count. Can you tell me that, Mr. Litz?
I believe we would, and I actually think that the machines would probably do a more accurate job than a hand count at the end of the day.
MIT and Caltech did a study. They said the most accurate method of counting votes is by hand. Forget the machines. By hand is the only way to get a full, true count. There was a famous interview Dan Rather did with a computer expert. Is it possible to fix an election? You know what that guy said? Get me a job at the company that makes those machines. They need to be counted by hand at the precinct level in front of the community, and the results posted at the precinct before they ever leave. Centralized voting is a recipe for tyranny, and that is what we have. To believe that the people in this country, we keep hearing, oh, these people, they just keep electing incumbents. They're unhappy with Washington, they're unhappy with Pierre, but they keep electing incumbents. Do we really? Do we really? Are we all that stupid? I don't think so. We need our elections back. You guys have delegated your job. The most important job you have is to give us an honest count. And you have delegated it to some company that you don't know, who counts the votes that you don't see, and you box them up and put them in storage. I'm disgusted with how elections are handled in this state. Shame on you. We don't have real elections. Why do you think people don't vote anymore? Because they don't believe the results. They're like, I can't believe he won. I can't believe it. Maybe there's a reason. because they're not right. They're not right. We are not that stupid. Give us back our elections. Give us back our elections. You know, Joseph Stalin had a famous saying, doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes. And we never get to count our votes anymore. We are guaranteed public, honest elections. And the Supreme Court said the right to vote includes the right to know your votes are counted. We don't know. You don't know. Not a one of you auditors know if that is accurate. They're all programmed.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any comments?
My name is Dan Daly. I'm a citizen of the city and the county. I'd like to thank this panel for your review process, and especially Bruce for getting this activity organized. I'm paying attention, and I need to pay attention, and I haven't been paying attention. This lady's upset. Let's all take a deep breath and let's go to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Anybody else have any comments? That being the case, what we'd like to do now is take a couple moments and have a demonstration of the AutoMark machine. This is a machine that is designed for the people with disabilities. And who would be operating the AutoMark machine? Bob or Darlene?
Just to clarify, that machine can be used by anybody.
Anybody, yes. Thank you, Sue. I've personally never used one, so that's why I wanted to be able to see this.
Well, it has features for those that are hearing disabled. It also has a feature for the visually disabled. It has Braille with a set of earphones on. And then if you have physical infirmities that won't allow you to push the buttons, you can do the touch screen. So there's 3 avenues available. And anybody can vote on this. And all it does is mark your ballot. It doesn't do anything but mark the choices you make. If you make a mistake, it'll ask you if you want to do it over again. It's a great machine for people that are disabled. It doesn't get used all that much in the precincts. There's a couple of them that probably get used more than other places, but I think at the end of the day, when you hear somebody say they're really glad they have that machine out there and they like it and they're able to vote in private, it makes it all worthwhile. So, a person that wants to use this machine, like I said, anybody can use it. We come get their ballot through the normal process. And then we go over there. A lot of times we'll have a shroud on here, depending on they set that shroud up where this machine's located, give them privacy. You get your ballot, you insert your ballot. Makes a little bit of noise, takes a little bit of time, but the screen will come up and tell us when we're ready to vote. What I have here is it's a demo ballot, and there's a chip that goes into this machine that gets programmed with the election on it. Right now, this demo ballot, I think I'll just pass one of these down here. You can see it's for demonstration purposes only. Everybody likes this ballot. Ask you what's your best automobile manufacturer, best vocal artist, you get to pick 2. Best ice cream flavor, you in favor of a 3-day weekend, it should maybe be increased every 6 months rather than every year. The questions are there. Comes up, gives you your voting instructions. You've got the earphones on, it will read you these instructions. And the next is flashing, so if you're ready to start the process, you push next. It says best automobile manufacturer, vote for 1. So I'm just going to pick the Mercedes today. Not that I own one. Go to next. It says best vocal artist, Frank Sinatra, Elvis, Patsy Cline, Janis Joplin. Today I like Patsy and I like Janis. So I'm going to go with those 2, since I can pick 2. And then go to the next. It says best ice cream, vote for 1. Chocolate. So I'm going for chocolate. Let's go to next. It says, are you in favor of a 3-day weekend? Sometimes, but that's not an option, so I'm going to push yes. Go to next. It says, should pay increases be issued every 6 months rather than yearly? Why not? So here we go. Straight in the county budget. Now I've got a recap of everything that I've just voted for. Okay, it's on this screen. And if you don't like something that's on there, you can scroll up, go to it, and then go back. But I'm looking at it, everything that I wanted on that ballot is showing on this screen. So then I go to next. And the marked ballot thing comes up and flashes at you. So then I'll push the marked ballot. I tested it yesterday and I tested it this morning, and meanwhile, between the time that I tested it yesterday and today, the ink cartridge face had dried out, so I cleaned it off. That was an hour ago. That's a very common problem with these. We remedied that by starting to put the ink cartridge in plastic bags. It seems to work pretty good. We got a call on election morning about this thing not working. Probably 80% of the time, it's that ink cartridge that gives us a little bit of grief. Well, I pull my ballot out and I see that the marks on this ballot are the ones that I had ordered up. So that is the machine, and then that person would put their ballot, if they like, in this thing, and then they go over to the ballot machine or the ballot box, and they drop it in the ballot box, just like everything else. Is there anything else that you need to see, Mr. Daniels?
No, does anybody have a question about this? Thank you, Bob. We appreciate that.
Yeah, there's the ballots left over here, so after the meeting, if you want to come and run one of these through.
All right.
I was gonna ask Sue, when were these purchased?
2006.
And there's not a problem with getting them serviced? They're getting
You know, we've
whiskers on
got,
'em.
we go through them every year, because some of them come back with notes on them, and we try to fix them. A lot of times it's mechanical things like a broken wheel on the case or a handle or something like that, and we can order the part. I think I've got 6 of them that we're actually gonna have to talk to the manufacturer right now. We have enough to go out to all the precincts.
They haven't warned you that they'll be discontinued or anything like that in the future?
Yeah, then this company that put these out has got a newer model.
They're still refusing, they're not, at least they're still servicing these though, they're not refusing.
Yeah, we can get parts.
Okay.
And I think they are required, I remember reading someplace on this here, like the 650s, they're required by law to keep a certain inventory of certain parts past the date where they use it. It's kind of like an automobile manufacturer, so
Thanks.
their obsolescence isn't quite as immediate as the date they use.
Does anybody in the audience have a question for Bob that they'd like to bring up?
Is there
Yeah,
electronic
could-
backup? Electronic backup? Will this is the tally and?
Excuse me, Dan, could you come to the microphone, please?
Is there electronic backup? In other words, is there redundancy? The
Well,
vote is counted.
there's a log in here that tells what has happened, the steps that have been taken on it, but as far as that being backed up in the ballot, no, once it's out of here, the ballot is paper. And once that ballot goes in the ballot box, that's it. Do we have a number on here of ballots that are voted on there? Yes, we do. We write that number down at the beginning of when the machines are started up, and we close out.
I encourage backup before it leaves the room.
Can I,
This, go ahead, Sue.
It's not, it's just a ballot marker, sir. It'll be the same as you mark your ballot.
say it's a glorified pencil.
Yeah, because it prints out
Say
the
that.
ballot.
Would you say that?
The only thing this machine is a glorified pencil. There, it has no, saves no data.
Bob, how does someone who's blind or has sight problems, how do they vote?
Well, then, during election school, people have those questions, and what I'd say is help them in any manner that you can. And somebody, one of the election officials, probably the superintendent's gonna come over, sit them down, explain it to them. And there's kind of, some people like you to help them, and they don't care, but you have to, if you're gonna help them, you kind of have to stand off and not watch them in the process.
But
If they-
They have headphones. so-
Headphones.
Pardon me?
for the
They do
person-
have
They have
Yeah.
headphones, that's how they vote.
But I
That was your
liberally
question.
construe the idea of an election worker helping somebody with this machine. And I said before, I tell people, before you come around, if you're helping somebody, before you come around, you look at the screen and you can see their vote. Some people care, some people don't. Get their permission. I think that's the best we can do, Joe.
They
There's
do.
braille on here, there's the headphones, and then there's braille on here, and then there's the buttons for going up and down, increasing the tempo, increasing the volume, and your selections.
Okay, so that's where the braille is on the small keyboard on the side.
Yes, right on your face.
All right.
And I do have fun ballots up here, if any of you want to come and run a ballot through this machine today.
When you put on the headphones, it gives you complete instructions about locating the keys, and the keys are different shapes. The square one in the middle is where you select, and then you use the right and left keys to go navigate between screens, and the headphones tell you all of that. So a blind person, once they're headed in the direction of the automark, can vote completely independently. And if a person is handicapped to the extent that they can't even handle their ballot, can't put it in or out, that's when you use that ballot sleeve that Bob showed. It can be attached to the front of the machine with Velcro, so when their ballot comes out after it's been voted, it will be covered. So even if an election worker has to carry their ballot, physically carry their ballot from the machine to the ballot box, it's in a sleeve, so it is still private.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any other questions about it? Thank you, Bob. We're going to move along next to the e-poll book demonstration. And first, before Bob sits down, I wanted Bob or Darlene to be able to show what the current system that Minnehaha County uses with the paper poll book, the notebooks that we've got.
Well, would you like me to run these across so you folks can look at them?
First, you could just come up to the front here, and you could just have them sitting there, and you
Bob,
could explain the two different books that you
Okay.
have. And
Bob Litz with the Auditor's Office. Of course, the first one I brought along just for purposes of comparison. This is the old one, and during the 2012 election, I still use that. It's printed on a different kind of a scanner on different kinds of paper, and it's got blue and white lines on them, so you can read across parallel. The ink is kind of light on here. The printer that we used, I think it's a little bit dated, and but anyway, this poll book has a place where you can write the voter number in there. You can put the stamp on there as the voter is identified as they come in. This is the old style that we used to have pre-total vote. And I'll lay that on the table over there in case anybody wants to look at it. Since total vote came around, what we have done is gone to a much smaller version, and I believe a better, easier to read version on small white note paper. It makes for a little bit thicker of a book, but I think that the white paper with the black ink on the background makes a lot of difference. Now here are the scanner bars that are ID'd. The voters can be ID'd. And at the end of the election, we go through these poll books, we see who has voted, and then we scan that and we upload it to the voter history. And typically on a big, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks after the election before that voter history is loaded up. This is the new one here, folks. A lot of you are familiar with it. But anyway, like I said, I'll put these two on the table over there so you can just kind of look, see, feel what they're about. Are there any questions that I can answer on them?
I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the electronic version of the book. And could you want to take the notebooks down? Oh, thank you, Darlene. If you want to set those on the table, then we're. We've asked representatives from the e-poll book company that we work with, and I'll have these individuals that will be speaking identify themselves and what companies they're with and how they tie into the system. And
I'll introduce myself. My name is Brian Mortimer. I'm here with Seidel, spelled S-C-Y-T-L. We're the technology provider behind the poll books that have been used here in South Dakota before. What I'd like to do, get to show up on our screen.
we're seeing this one. Did that?
The top one is not showing.
Will this get turned on?
Now there's a light on it, so. Step one.
Step one. There we go.
Okay, I'd first like to describe what a poll book, electronic poll book is and is not. The electronic poll book is really a replacement for that paper poll list. It is not something that somebody votes on. It does not count votes. It does not hold ballots. It is primarily a means used to authenticate people coming into the polling place and ensure that that voter is eligible to vote that ballot style. So it associates a voter with a particular ballot style. The process that a poll worker would use would be to use this quick search. You can see on the screen they can search by last name, first name, middle initial. It's a very simple search for the user. I'll go ahead and use just a couple of letters of each name, and I get a couple of different voters that I can select here. The poll book is able to handle situations just like you would see in the paper poll book. In this case, this voter is eligible, but they need to complete a new application. So the poll book gives that poll worker a prompt, allowing the poll worker to process that voter correctly. So okay, I'll go ahead here and say that I've committed a new application for that voter, and then I can post this voter. This voter has not yet voted. This voter is now authorized to vote. I can collect that signature electronically. And accept that signature. And then I can continue to search. When the voter is successfully posted, it prints out a receipt that includes a ballot style and the information about that voter. I can pass this around in just a moment. So the poll book is actually very simple. This is technology that we've used in the past for the past 5 years. Poll book technology is basically 10 years old now, and as you know, all technology changes and evolves very quickly. So we have moved from this being a device, the poll book being a device that we put into the polling place, to now we talk about the poll book being the protocol, or the language that we use to communicate the voter list to the polling place. That allows us to use newer technology, such as tablets in the future, which is going to allow the commission to spend less money on poll books and to be able to do refreshes and things like that of partial instead of the whole set of poll books in the future. So our goal is to ensure that you can use the latest technology to process voters and ensure transparency across the election. What poll books allow is for things like super precincts, consolidated polling places, vote centers, and it would also allow for early voting scenarios should you decide to do that in the future. So it's a technology that allows all of your polling places to communicate with each other, that keeps people from being able to submit a ballot in one location and then move to another and then vote again. So it's in that way it kind of goes beyond what it's able to do on a paper poll list. The other thing it's able to do is provide the election administrator an accurate view into all the events inside that polling place. So it gives that election administrator a list of who came in, when, how was that voter handled. So it gives him a good account of exactly what's going on inside that polling place. So with that, we have new stuff that's coming out that's more centrally managed, where we can ensure, switch this over. Where we can ensure, if you look at this map here, we can see which polling places are up and live and where voters are checking in, which ones might need attention. We can see that on election day before people come in. We can do turnout reports and additional information. Another thing that's important is being able to track the number of ballot styles, number of ballots, paper ballots that are available in each polling place, especially if you have a vote center scenario or an early voting scenario where voters can go to more than one location. This allows that inventory to be tracked, and so you can ensure that there's a ballot available for every voter when they walk into the door. So that's a very quick summary of the poll book technology, and I'm available for any questions.
Any of the panel have questions at this point? Yeah,
I
go
have a
ahead.
question for Lori. Is this the same equipment that you used for your 2014 election?
No, we use the HART system, HART InterCivic.
That's
this
HART.
is the HART InterCivic system. We're the
Oh, okay.
technology provider behind this
Oh,
HART poll.
okay, all right.
And a follow-up, were you able to see ballot inventory at precincts? I know that was an issue.
Well, we did have tablets, and originally they did show us the ballot inventory, but after a little while, it wasn't really working, and so we would look at more as far as the count, so we knew when to get more ballots out there. So it worked at first, and then as the day went on, it really didn't work for us.
Okay.
I'd like to get into a couple of situations with where these were used in the city election, and one was there was a period of time when the machines started having some problems in the afternoon. And could you or Dusty be able to help us out and understand that particular issue?
What kind of problems?
Well, that's what we had some synchronization issues,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll have some.
I'm Dustin Van Balen. Yeah, what actually, there were some policies and procedures in place that weren't followed exactly how we laid them out. That kind of caused a broadcast storm at that
Could
time.
you explain what the broadcast storm means?
Broadcast storm is when all the poll books and the servers are trying to talk back and forth. There's not enough memory or enough, basically networking power to run all of that all at one time. And the hardware wasn't, at that time, it didn't seem like it was sufficient enough at that time, once that broadcast storm kicked in, to basically pick itself up. So it took a while for it to actually self-resolve itself and to come back and start working again towards the end of the evening.
I've been doing some data work, and in the kind of looking at the aftermath of the election, and I'll be getting into this more in a little bit, but one of the things that I discovered was the machines showed that there was a problem with 30 particular voters in the way the data was collected. And I wanted to have an understanding of what happened with these machines, with those 30 records. I gave you a copy of the issue that I'm talking about. And would you explain why we had, or potentially why we had, these 30 different individuals looking like they voted twice?
I can't speak for the past, but I'll let Brian answer that, kind of let you know what can happen to cause that sort of
Okay.
problem. So,
I can give a technical answer of the possible scenarios that can lead to that. The broadcast storm that Dusty was talking about, the way that gets introduced is if you have a poll book that's loaded with the initial voter list, and then it's set aside as a spare, and then later on in the election, you have a busy polling place, and then that poll book gets put inside that polling place without being caught up manually. The problem was that that poll book gets put into the polling place, and then the first thing it's going to do is say, I'm behind on all these records of these other voters that have voted, and it talks to the server and says, would you please catch me up? That creates a broadcast storm, which is a number of requests from that poll book to be able to update itself, and that's too much traffic in this case for it to be handled. It takes time for that information to move across. The process that should have been followed was an export from an up-to-date poll book should have been taken and then caught that poll book up before it gets introduced onto the voting system.
As I understand it from a discussion that we had yesterday, trying to understand this issue, you talked about there was a time during the city election that where some poll books were moved around to help alleviate the load at certain voting centers. And so in the process of moving these computers from this voting center or from a trunk of a car and put into service where they were needed, it took time for those machines, those computers, to upload all the current information so it could be synchronized with the system. And it caused a system overload. And it brought, and you said something about having a triangle on the screen and what that meant.
That's correct. We have a triangle on the screen which indicates a voter collision. For us, a voter collision means that the system has detected that a voter was posted twice. This happens occasionally if you have a system where a voter goes through one line, misunderstands, and he'll check in the line right next to him very quickly. You can end up with that kind of a situation. In that case, it's easy to identify. It's a timestamp that's a couple apart, and it's usually a voter that just misunderstood the instructions and was able to post twice. That comes up when you have a machine in the middle of one of these broadcast storms and all these poll books are trying to catch up. If a voter, if that situation happens, it will show up as a duplicate voter because that voter wasn't listed as marked voted yet on that second computer.
Just for the panel, and there's also over on the table is a sheet that looks like this. And this is what we're talking about, and I apologize for not bringing this up. What this is, when I was doing my data research, I looked at the voting center situation, because I remember at the end of the election night that there was some consternation about the numbers not matching. And so this was part of that issue, I believe, now that I can go back and have the discussions that I've had with Auditor Litz and you and Dusty, and trying to understand why the numbers didn't match at the end of the night. It is because these machines had been moved around and hadn't been kept synchronized during the day. And we also show on here 3 voters. It looks like 3 voters went to a different part of town at a different time of the day. And it's very possible these machines had come out of a trunk or moved from one to the other, and they were in the process of resynchronizing.
Correct. Yeah, the process that should be followed is a poll book before it gets put to supplement other activity at a polling location should be caught up with the other poll books at that location before it gets put into use. That process was not necessarily followed. Another thing that should be done is if a poll book is moved from one polling place to another, it should not only be caught up, but it should also be designated at the new polling location. If that's skipped, then that poll book will still think it's at the other polling location. So you could have 2 poll books side by side, and it'll appear as if voters checked in at a location where they were not.
Good. Please, Kia.
Were the people running easy poll books thoroughly trained on that before they were left to use them? For the people-
Please come up, Dusty.
People left, I mean, at the polling place that were in charge of the poll books and poll workers, were they thoroughly trained to understand that whole syncing and that whole entire process?
Yeah, I had some officials from the Secretary of State's office that went out there and trained, done several training sessions with each county. And I know that the city of Sioux Falls was one of them. They'd conducted several trainings, if I can remember correctly.
Yeah, we did a lot of training. I don't know that the training that the Secretary of State's office conducted specifically covered if we had to move a poll book, because that wasn't really in the plan. And we did have to move some poll books from one location to another, and I myself was not even aware we had to do that. And so I know the workers at the vote center absolutely did not know
Yeah,
that.
and that was a policy kind of laid out for the people that were working at the SOS office, or Secretary of State's office, the people that were assisting the city at that time. We told them that if they had those in their hand to let certain people know that they were going to turn them on so that we could get them caught up, and that policy was, there was a lot of mass confusion because of so many people voting in one location. So
Right.
they put more poll books there, I think, to cover those more people.
Right, we pulled some from another location, pulled them from Mari Carr and took them to Faith Baptist, and then I believe there were even a couple spares that were were taken by Secretary of State staff to that location.
Yes.
And yet, there's only one entry on these 2 pages that involves Faith Baptist. Almost all of them are different polling places.
Yeah.
There was another issue, and I don't know if you've resolved that or if that's because of this electronic storm, but that needs to be addressed, is at Faith Baptist, when we got to the end of the day, none of our poll books had the same numbers, because they're supposed to show how many people voted at the location.
Yeah.
There was a 300 voter difference, but the real significant thing was that the one that was highest, that's the one that had the most on it, said we'd voted 3,200 voters at that location when we had actually voted 4,200, which made me wonder if these machines are capable of keeping up when it's 1,000 off in your numbers.
Again, those were the older poll books too. So those
So
were a
this,
different version of
those
this.
problems are resolved now?
This is a newer version of the poll
Good.
book, and we have ran a primary excuse me, there was a primary and a general conducted with these poll books with new hardware, new software, and there was no issues.
What's the maximum number of voters at any location where they were tested?
I cannot remember, I can't recall. Kia could possibly provide that for us.
If you went back and looked.
I was not in that administration when the poll books went into place, so I don't know if those
There'd possibly be some reports that we could talk about with staff with that, so. If I can recall, I know there were some that were in 6,000-8,000 range.
At one location, voting at one
Not at
location?
one location in one county.
Yeah,
There were-
and
yep.
we're talking about one room
I
in
don't
one
remember the
location.
maximum one that was.
There's a-
4,200.
Yeah, I don't remember the maximum.
Okay.
There's a breakdown of all the polling locations and the vote counts and how they all laid out in here on this particular spreadsheet, so that to help answer, and it's in this packet and on the table to help answer some of those questions. But looking at Faith Baptist, there was 4,267 total votes counted. And now, in following up with Sue's question, when these machines are dumped at the end of the election, in other words, all the data is copied off of is there an image that's kept of that activity on that particular machine, and then saved on a table specifically saying that it came off of machine 3 that was at this location?
There's nothing that specifies the actual machine that was used, but the database and everything that was used on that poll book is cleared using an archive and clear utility. So it gets, when the poll book gets cleared, that data gets put onto a USB stick, and the technician usually goes from poll book to clear them. So all that ends up as an individual archive. That identifies the poll book, its poll book ID, which is stored in the system, which is not necessarily the same as the hardware ID, and the polling place and everything that happened with it.
What happens with that data? It doesn't stay on a flash drive forever, so.
It goes into whatever the current election archive process is.
Okay.
Jurisdiction. I
And
don't know what the current process was at that time.
we don't know what happens to that. Maybe in the next segment of this meeting, we might be able to ask about that information, because we'll have some more questions, so.
When these machines are operating at each of the poll sites, are they hooked up to the internet?
They can be or they cannot be. It's they use a IP network connection to be able to talk to a server or a broker. That can be hosted through a virtual private network or through private MiFi devices. I think in this case they were connected to the public internet for this election.
And all the information that's going across the internet is encrypted?
It's encrypted twice. It's got an encryption in an SSL tunnel with a certificate that's used on the client side, and then within that SSL tunnel, it's encrypted based on an election encryption key that the poll books share.
And that's how it works here in Minnehaha County?
That's correct.
That's the SOP? Okay.
You have to go through effort to not do that.
Does anybody have any?
Is this something you're going to discuss at some point?
Yeah, it's all reference. She's asking about the spreadsheet that I just passed out. This is, and I'll get into this in the next
That's
section
later.
as to,
Okay.
but I wanted to tell you that the 4267 was what was happening at Faith, and if a machine was only registering 3267 or whatever the number was, then wanted to have that understanding.
Yeah, it's from a technological perspective, we've made changes so it doesn't happen again. But in addition to that, I can definitely see where you can have a broadcast storm using the old technology, and it would produce those results where the poll books are not able to keep up.
Just as a point of reference in here, if you have 100,000 voters, how long does it take to synchronize the data on one of these computers before it can be put into service?
It depends on if you're using the older technology or the newer technology.
Both.
The technology that was in use at the time, the older technology, used a methodology where that poll book would then send out a request to the network asking the network to feed it information. That is what created a broadcast storm. The new technology, the poll book that comes online, talks to a central server, and that server sends a consolidated election package. So in that case, it's one communication to a central broker, which then populates the information and catches that one poll book up. So in the newer technology, a poll book has no influence on the poll book next to it.
Go ahead, Kia.
I know like the previous administration purchased all the hard e-poll books for the counties that were using them, so all of those are still on the old technology, and they can still have little syncing problems when they use them in the next election.
There's a difference between the hardware and the software. The changes that I'm talking about are software changes.
Okay.
So even that old hardware could be used using the new software, and it would be
They would
fine.
have to purchase an upgrade for the new software.
I'm not sure exactly what the upgrade path is, but I think it needs to be Windows 7 or minimum.
Just to, so that everybody understands, and it's clear that what we're dealing with here is just the e-poll book, and it has nothing to do with anybody actually putting a ballot in the box. This is just the method of talking between the database that says you have the ability to vote, and you're actually getting a ballot, and then we have other systems that go on from that point.
That's correct.
So during a broadcast storm, can you still process voters into the system, or does it stall?
You can process voters to the system. It doesn't keep you from processing voters. It just keeps that poll book from having the most recent information about all the other activity going on at that time in the election.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any further questions? Is there questions from the, would you come up and identify yourself? And
Thank you for this opportunity, Laura Hubble. Just a question, is a theory question. That 1,000 people difference that the poll book did not have in the poll book and yet registered to vote at Faith Baptist, could they in theory have voted again sometime at a different, they probably didn't realize that they could have if indeed they could have, but in theory, could they have voted at another location? Since they were not marked in the poll book, but they were marked on the paper at Faith Baptist polling place. Do you understand my question?
I'll let Brian and Dusty handle this.
Sure. I believe the question is that, is it possible during this broadcast storm when these poll books are not communicating for someone to go from one polling place to another and vote twice? And that is a possibility. That could happen in that situation. That's why it was important for us to resolve this issue technologically.
How long did the broadcast storm last?
I'm not sure exactly. Dusty may have better metrics, but I believe it was at least a few hours. And I think it went from middle of the day until very close to the end of election.
How many people from your company were on site?
I'm not sure. We had Hart InterCivic sent representatives. I don't think Seidel had any representatives on site during that election.
No.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you, Dusty.
We just have to ask the previous administration or the existing SOS office about that. They would have record of that, I would suspect.
Dusty, weren't you part of that previous administration? And
Yes.
weren't you involved in that whole process?
I just don't want to speak for the past.
I can answer that for the city. We had no representatives there from Hart InterCivic or this new company, no.
But,
Were there any there from the Secretary of State's office?
oh, yes.
There
Oh,
was-
yes,
Yes,
many
there were
people,
About
yeah,
5,
many.
I think.
I think
You
we
were
had-
in Pier,
I
though,
was in Pier.
because you were supporting and you were able to update e-poll books at my polling location.
Yes.
Uh,
We had some remote software on there. that we
Yeah,
could
he was the remote support.
Right.
Were
But-
all of the Secretary of State staff trained on equal books?
Yes,
This?
yes, they were the ones that actually conducted the training that came back on election day and were all throughout the city and helping us, and, yep, they were all trained on it.
Is it a normal procedure for your company to have somebody on site where the election's being held for one of your clients? Or is that too big of a footprint to be able to maintain?
At this point, it just kind of depends. You can usually have 1 or 2 representatives on site. If here in Sioux Falls, with the vote centers, it was easy. There was 13, and at the SOS office, with the city's help, we were able to just cover all of them back and forth. People had hardware, software with them, or I'm sorry, hardware and ballots possibly with them, and they could run back and forth if need be. So.
And is that part of the contract, to have on-site support day of election?
And that's kind of how, at that point, this was all strictly the SOS office for this stuff. We would call the representative at that point, or Hart would send a representative or 2 if we asked them to. But at that time, it was all Secretary of State with the city at that time.
Was anybody briefed on the fact that they should not connect these machines in the way in which it happened? Did that briefing occur?
Secretary of State's office, they knew that. But there were poll workers at certain places turning them on that we found out about. They were turning them on or they were turning them off because their printer would not print paper. So rather than adjusting the printer, they would just turn the poll book off. And then they'd be like, whoops, and turn it back on because they needed it later on. Well, that poll book would have to synchronize, possibly 10, 12,000 voters. And so now it's starting to send out its broadcast that I need voters, I need to deny voters, and that's what's happening.
So are the workers specifically briefed on what to do and what not to do?
I wasn't at the training sessions. That would be.
Yeah, the training was pretty extensive. A lot of the poll workers had worked with them before. I don't know, to your question, if they were specifically told if the machine shuts down or if you restart it, what the process was. I don't recall that ever being covered, and I was at every training session.
Is there any kind of a one-page, front and back, basic instruction of what happens on this situation, or, given with each one of these machines when they're set
Really-
up?
Yeah, really was just a setup, mostly manual for these. There was a couple little things I think on the back of them that I could remember.
But nothing to say what the triangle meant?
No, that kind of just causes people to sit there and read and then worry about it. So, that should have been when they were conducting the training.
Yeah, I don't remember them ever mentioning that, Dusty, but we did have information sheets that were put together for all the election workers in color, if there were, for each vote center, with information about setting them up and that kind of thing. But I don't remember us ever talking about that triangle screen.
Now, the question was brought up earlier, is it theoretically possible that people could vote twice during a broadcast storm? However, is there an ultimate record created that would show that?
Yeah, we actually did discuss that yesterday. It's called
It's called a collision report, but it's very easy to track that. The poll book does record everything that happens. So after the election, we gather all the information from it regardless of the synchronization process, and we can produce very accurate reports from all the poll book. So we know exactly what happened, or at least what the poll books think happened at that time.
Is this reporting, these collision reports, is there anyone monitoring them during the course of the election?
The intent of the triangle was to be the real-time monitor that a collision event has occurred at the polling place.
Okay. And then how is that data maintained after the election?
For us, that reporting data as a vendor, we turn it over just like we do with the archive and clear information to the entity conducting the election. And it goes into their archival processes.
And what is the archival process for either the city, the county, using the e-poll books?
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Brandon Campia. We created Total Vote, which is the end result of the archive process. So what happens from the poll books is we get a file, an export of all the voters that voted, so we can update the voter history for each voter, and we import that file into Total Vote, and then that is recorded to each voter as voted in that election. And then that data is saved forever. We have voter history for 60, 70 years.
The information that we were just asking the question about off of each machine. So we have computer number 105. The information that was taken off of that machine, is that saved permanently on a table in your system?
It is, yes.
So we'll always be able to go back and audit each one of these machines, if there was ever a question during a recount or anything else.
We could, yes. We save that data.
So in the situation where we have these 30 issues that we discovered, we'd be able to go back and see the signatures and everything else that went along with this to make sure that whatever was done with these.
We don't get the signatures.
Okay.
So no, we don't have that information. We get the voters that voted in this election at this polling place.
Okay. Do you know where when they do the signing pad, do you know where those signatures are when it's done?
That's not part of Total Vote. That's
Okay.
part of the poll books. So maybe
Okay.
Ryan can answer that.
So if we had to do an audit of the process, there was some kind of an issue, catastrophic, and we needed to reconstruct what happened that day and verify these collisions that this was in fact the same person that the machines failed, and so we've got multiple records, and, you know, we're not saying multiple voting, we're just saying multiple records in the poll book. Is there a way that we can verify that these were two distinct different signatures, or they were the same signature, or?
Yeah, the signatures that are collected by the poll book are collected in a format of the VUID, the voter ID number, and then an extension of a GIF file. So it's just a graphic image file, and it's collected in a single folder. So it's one folder with every signature in it tagged by that voter ID number. So it's very easy to find the voter and even a duplicate and find the signatures there and be able to do comparisons.
And-
We provide that information to the election conducting entity usually, and it goes again into their individual archival processes.
And so right now, we aren't uploading the GIFs into Total Vote?
That I don't know. I know that the poll book
No.
produces that.
We're not, we don't get the signature gifs. The only signature we have for each voter comes from driver's licensing. When you sign the signature pad, when you get your license and register to vote, we get that signature. And that's the only signature we have for voters.
One more question. So what good does it do to sign this if we don't have it saved somewhere to go back and audit?
The only purpose for the signature, under my understanding, is that as a voter, you're signing that you are who you say you are and that you have the right to vote. That's the only purpose of the signature
So,
on the poll books.
so Bruce, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I recall what we did down in Union County when we challenged the election is we asked for that copy of the signatures, and it says, it gives the, what is it, it comes out on an 8.5 by 17 piece of paper. I think there were 150 voters in that election. You can get a copy of that, so you can find out who voted at that precinct site, who didn't.
But what I'm
So there is a record maintained.
there's
of that.
a record maintained, but as part of this, I think Bev wants to add something to this, but what I wanted to do was to say, in an audit process, I want to be able to see all of those voter signatures to make sure that they matched or they could be sworn.
I'm Bev Chase, I'm with the school district,
Thank you,
School
Bev.
District. When we went out to Pierre to offer this legislation, the then Secretary of State, Chris Nelson, put a caveat into the bill that said that we would have paper printouts of their names. So every one of those ballot receipts, every one of these is put on a spindle, and then at the end of the night, we have all of these receipts, and it has their signature on them.
Okay. So all of those receipts are then saved,
Yes.
Or,
they-
you know,
they're
for as
like
long
our
as it's-
poll book.
okay.
They're like our poll book. They get, they get saved with the election stuff until we can dispose the election.
okay, that's,
And
I
then Bev,
keep them, I think we'd have to keep them 6 months, but I usually keep my stuff longer, and then I
I
dispose
think
of
it's 60 days.
60, yeah.
60 days, yeah.
and
And
if
I,
I'm not
For
mistaken,
local.
you
Yeah.
you can generate another subsequent report,
Yes.
not in these little cards, but it comes
exactly.
out in these,
When,
comes out, however you want to format it, PDF
in
files, whatever.
2012, when we did, not 2012, was it, one of the elections we did, at the end of the report, at the end of the voting, you could run a report of voters voted, and you could see all those voters that voted, and they had their signatures next to them. It was a very nice report.
okay.
Does that help?
That helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Can I clarify a couple things? I think I'm hearing you say that the issues that we had with that storm, whatever it was, and the collisions, that has been taken care of with the latest upgrades to your software. Is that correct?
That's correct. In my opinion, the software was too fragile at that time.
Mhm.
When the processes weren't followed, it created a risk. So we did some technological changes to keep that from happening again.
Okay, so we clearly had some problems in 2014, but going forward, people need to know that those have been resolved. One other item, we have talked a little bit about whether the county might use e-poll books, but not related to voting centers. So that would be just using them as a resource in place of those paper books that Bob showed us at the beginning. And in that case, none of these issues would be of any relevance. Because if they're just being used to look up voters at one location, and they only have loaded the voters for that location, none of the concerns we've been raising here would be involved.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah,
Okay.
actually, communication is not even required in that scenario.
Okay.
As part of your testing of the new software, did you replicate the same circumstances that happened here?
We have done that, and we've done it to twice the scale size, yes.
Does anybody have any more questions on the e-poll books? Thank you very much, appreciate it. We're going to move on to the part of the meeting where we're going to be discussing total vote, the B-Pro, and the ERM processes on what happens to the data once it leaves the machine. Well, it feeds the computer, and then after the election, what happens to the information. And we've asked the Secretary of State and Brian Campia from B-Pro to be with us and give an explanation of total vote.
Okay, Brandon Campia again with B-Pro. Total Vote is South Dakota's statewide voter registration system. It's used by every county in the state, and it went live in 2012. It handles all voter registrations, whether they come from driver's licensing or the auditor's office or anywhere else. And it also handles absentees and every election in the state. That can include candidates, races, ballot questions, and reporting on election night. Or it can only include voter history, and that would be just the fact that certain voters voted in a given election throughout the state. That can be school elections, city elections, or statewide elections. Now, the statewide elections, all the candidates and races and ballot questions are handled through Total Vote, but all the other elections, that's not required. And that's just based on the county if they want to handle those elections or not. And that's kind of the 10,000-foot view of what Total Vote does. But any questions, I can be happy to answer.
Could you talk to us about the structure of what Total Vote is, what kind of a database system it is, the background of it?
Sure.
The county previously had an AS400 system that Sue maintained as part of her work as county auditor, and Bob Litz moved the data up into Total Vote in 2012. So can you discuss the differences in those types of systems?
I can try.
All right.
We actually started in 2007 and then 2008 with Secretary Nelson in developing the election management piece, which handled the candidates' races, and we worked with Sue and all the other auditors at that point. Total Vote is an enhancement to that system. All that functionality is included in Total Vote, but we added voter registration, absentees, polling places, precincts, all that to include in the entire system for the election process. Compared to a mainframe, we're using Microsoft SQL Server. We host part of this on Azure. We host part of this on Rackspace. All of these systems are not on the state network, but some of the data we receive is on the state network. That would be driver's licensing, death records from Department of Health, or criminal records from UJS. So we do have some interaction with state systems as well. You're trying to compare a mainframe to the current Total Vote system. They're different. Mainframes, sometimes they're hard to access. Some people call them green screens because you have a monochrome screen and you have to use your keyboard. Sometimes you can't use your mouse. The data structure itself, I would say, is fairly similar. We're storing voter records, their relation to absentee records, voter history, precincts, ballot styles, races, candidates. All that structure is fairly similar. I don't know what their old system was, but I would assume it's fairly similar. We had to import their old data, so we do understand overall the structure of election data and voter data. I don't know if that helps or muddies it, but
No, it's all background, and just, does anybody have, before we get into the next part of this, in the questioning side, I wanted to, I guess we have the next part of it is some work that I've been doing. And I'm going to read a piece that I put together to help explain what I've been doing and what this stack of papers I laid on everybody's table is all about. So if you want to sit down, that'd be fine. You don't have to stand there for this. But since December, we've been researching the voting process in Sioux Falls, Minnehaha County, and the state of South Dakota. Each member of this committee has special skills and knowledge they've used as part of these discussions. With this committee's knowledge, my assignment was to research the data side of our voting process. I could go into a great deal of detail and bore each of you with too much detail at this time, but I won't. I've managed IT shops, done data recovery, studied, and mined data for 30 years. This data and the process examination brought to light many weaknesses in the way our data has been compiled, processed, updated, and saved. I've been disappointed with every government level involved. Every office involved in this data played its part in the process failures. My political science and history degree gave me an insight into the processes we examined. The many years being involved in the political side of the voting process and my natural skepticism of modern voting systems brought me to the Minnehaha County Resolution Board for the first time in 2012. I needed to see it up close and personal. The City of Sioux Falls petition drives in 2012 and 13 gave me a need to buy voter lists to verify our signatures. The data issues I found in these files caused me to take a deeper look at the data side of the election process. The first files were created in late August, then September of 2013, and February of 2014. I was appalled by the sloppy nature of this data. In February 2014, I attempted to contact the Secretary of State's office to inform them of the problems, but no one would return my phone calls. We learned to work with the hundreds of bad addresses we found. As part of this report, I yesterday loaded the December 2012 pre-conversion AS400 data used setting up the South Dakota's total vote database. It is this database of an old design showed the data was fairly clean and the street directions appear to be correct, north, south, east, west. Using data supplied by the Secretary of State's office this week, my research has found at least 1,087 repairs performed to correct some of the address issues. I have found more and will be supplying these reports to the auditor's office for their continuing updates. The 2014 city election and the June primary elections were held using the same terrible data that I was supplied with. I'm not picking on these elections, but it is more to give you detailed information to analyze. With this data research still in progress, I have found a few highlights and questions needing attention. With all the bad data found, how could anyone do a voter purge in 2013 and feel secure it was correct? Did anyone care in the controlling of this data? Who audited the purge to verify the process was correct before the action? How could data be modified, uploaded into the new database system without quality control? Who wrote the procedures for the driver's license office to use to register voters? And where are the signers' cards? There were approximately 121,000 Minnehaha County, including 97,341 Sioux Falls records uploaded into the total vote beginning in December 2012. By 2013, there were 110,000 records supplied to me, of which 94,213 were for Sioux Falls.
Can you repeat those numbers?
Okay. We had, what I was given was 121,000 records.
Did they include both active and inactive
Yes.
voters?
Yes.
And the 110,000, did that include
Yes.
active and inactive?
Yes.
And had there been a purge done in between?
That's what I'm asking. So I'm
That would
trying
be-
to understand this whole process as I'm analyzing the data. So, I'll try to stay out of a lot of the really detailed stuff as part of this meeting, but I could get into it if we needed to. So what I found is these records were uploaded with, this is hard to understand, 385 different dates for the first 9-month period of operation of the Minnehaha County information on total vote. To use this file, I corrected the field to show 181 dates, a difference of almost 200 different ways dates had been put into the system. This encompassed thousands of voter information records with field errors. We had reports of people not being registered to vote any longer. How do we verify? What were the voting histories of those purged voters? Did they tend to be voters with long-standing histories of regular voting? We don't know. We've been asked what the demographics were and could they be independently verified. Do we know how many of these purged voters re-registered before the general election? Are there any non-malicious, purely data-based characteristics that could explain the update errors or purges as what we call fat-fingered errors? Could the system have purged voters based on table issues, length of name, alphabetical sequence of the name? You know, some systems freak out and deletes, let's say in a field, any record that is between J and M. Maybe a birth month problem, year or date, precinct number, et cetera. Will the voting center data collected be included in the voting history table for historical ability to audit? If the auditor's office is to be the absentee polling place, shouldn't they also be using the e-poll book like the rest of the voting centers? I asked for complete files to be with deceased, purged, and moved data so I could balance the auditable information. The city election comparison is showing the date of 4/8/2014 with what I was given, 3,676 votes cast versus the 31,957 reported. We're talking about a 300 vote difference in my ability to audit. It would have been easier to audit with the full database. I've studied the Sioux Falls information, and the city of Sioux Falls has a field in there called City Ward that is used by both Minnehaha County and the Lincoln County data. And each one of these uses a different name to identify what the city ward is. Why does this matter? How about voting centers having different ballot styles to choose from and the e-poll book not recognizing the correct city ward name to give out the correct ballot?
Are you saying that that is a situation that has occurred?
Well, that's what we're trying to understand.
Okay,
When we build,
you're just kind of asking questions
I'm asking
about possibilities.
Yes.
You aren't stating things that have occurred.
in 30 years of building these types of systems.
I'm
when
just
the-
trying to clarify.
Oh, no, I absolutely understand. And what I'm asking here is, does the e-poll book and does total vote, when you have two different, and this is in the paperwork I've supplied here, have two different precinct
I wish we had
names?
some of that paperwork so we would know
I'll
what
explain
you're
each
doing.
one of these.
Yeah.
In fact, I see this one right here for you.
Yeah, we don't have that document that you're reading.
No, this, I'm sorry,
So, okay.
I'm sorry I didn't have this, and I'll be
Okay.
giving it to everybody. Apologize, I finished it up this morning just before I had to leave, and I have, so I've studied the city ward field in both Lincoln and Minnehaha County data, and they're using different identification.
What do you mean by that?
In the form right there in front of you,
Yeah.
it shows a slight difference in the name of the precinct and the name of the ward.
So that's a name field.
That's a name field that's
Okay.
pulled as part of, and I'm going to be asking Brandon and the people from the e-poll book to make sure, how does that name get used? Because this is a name instead of, in the past, it used to be a number.
Well, the number, are you also pulling in the number field, which is the ward, council, district, precinct? Those are the data fields.
Well, in
that are
the
used.
information I received, I didn't, I
You
was.
didn't, so
I-
it sounds like you didn't get the complete information.
That's why I was asking.
Okay.
And that's, I mean, that's why it's important when you do audits, just for these very reasons. When we're trying to do an audit of this, or trying to understand how to make it work, or trying to build mailing lists, or trying to build any of this information, everything has to be consistent. And what I found in here, after spending essentially the last 14, 15 months looking at this data off and on, the inconsistencies caused a lot of extra work trying to figure out, and if you're issuing this information to the political parties to be able to mail from, or to work with Street Master, or to work with any of these other issues, none of this data is meshing like it should. And we need to have these systems talking. And I'll be done here in a moment, and I'd be glad to go into the rest of these things, why it matters, because I bring up a few other points in here. So the Sioux Falls precinct data, called pre-name, is identified in both counties differently. We've heard many stories, and that's on the second page of that one report. We've heard many stories of people getting wrong ballots, unusual voting patterns, and being excluded from voting. The press stressed a few of them in their reports after the election. I believe some of the causes start in the Secretary of State's total vote system. The Street Master system in Sioux Falls does not make systemic sense. It requires the users to make assumptions not always based on principles of logic. In an attempt to understand the county and city GIS system, a file was supplied to me to work with. In a matter of minutes, almost 600 errors were found, and I turned these in to see if they could be repaired. The city, counties, and state have been and are investing in major technology upgrades, but seem to be forgetting to have audit paths as part of this process. As part of our final report, we'll be breaking down this information further with more detailed recommendations. At this point, every office I've dealt with in this process has shared a blame for the issues we've had here. And I want to thank you for the time listening to this, and I'm sure there'll be some questions now for everybody. So I'm opening the floor for anybody to ask anything, and I apologize for not getting this copied for everybody, but I'll get it to everybody before we leave today.
Well, I think it would help if we had that in front of us, because you read so much information, but as far as total vote with the city, I mean, we don't do any entering or anything like that with total vote. We simply obtain the records from the county. I just wanted to clarify that we don't do.
Or the state.
Yeah, or the state, yeah. We don't do any entering on our own, anything in total vote.
Because you're in two counties.
Right.
You would
get ours from the state. Right.
What I discovered in here is, and this is just one of those things that happens I've brought systems together through my work that absolutely were never designed to talk to any other system, and I had to bring, where 4 different companies in one situation came together over a period of time, and the data didn't work, and they couldn't audit their books. They couldn't do a financial statement. So my job was to bring all this data in and figure out some kind of a conversion to it. And what I found in that situation is they didn't have fields that actually talked to each other with consistent data. And so in this situation, when we have Lincoln County and Minnehaha County in Sioux Falls, we have we have the same field with different looking information. And I wanted to see how, Hart was able to handle these situations, and how, when we get into it with BPRO, and how we're going to be able to make the process of city voting in Sioux Falls all be consistent, if that makes sense data-wise.
Here is the layout of the state voter file. You've got a precinct, you've got a ward. That data is consistent, and if you looked at Minnehaha and Lincoln counties, and we worked on that because before we went to total vote, Lincoln County and Minnehaha County had different formats for the precinct number. Now they have the same format. What you are looking at here, what you were given is just a name, an alpha field of a name of a precinct. That information is not used for anything other than to identify. And it's not used to, to say where a voter should vote, or it's the ward precinct registration information that keys everything.
Well, and this is the first time, in this whole process that I was looking for this type of a format, and I ended up with being given a different format, and that was one of my complaints in the last 14 months, 15 months that I've been doing this, is I'm trying to get consistent data, and I keep getting so different data. And so what I did this week, and Kia was able to help me with Brandon and so on, was to make sure I at least had something consistent and that I could work with.
I should note that that document that she has is what we used to have in administrative rule prior to 2011, and it's no longer in rule, so I guess.
You could find the current list of fields though.
Right.
And get that to
Yeah.
Bruce, so he could have the bigger picture of it.
So is it possible, Kia, that there's offices out there who are not using I guess it's not a mandatory.
Total vote?
Yeah, I mean, is it possible?
They're all using
Okay. Oh,
That's
okay.
required by state law, I believe.
And then so when you go into total vote, are all the form fields already pre-laid out like that?
Brandon, do you know if this is still the same format you're using?
I think you expanded the file, added more data, because there's more data for each voter, but you still have those key fields that go into the street master.
We do. It's similar, but of course it's changed because these fields they're in a different format now, but the same data is there. And every county has the same export function to create this file, as well as there's an absentee export that's automatically created. Somebody would want to subscribe to that, and it's the same data format.
And the program every county uses to enter the data
Is the
is
same.
identical.
Same, exact
Everybody's
same.
entering into the same
Correct.
system.
Same form fields?
Yep.
Same form fields. All the address fields are validated with a Melissa Data service. So they get sent out to Melissa Data. They come back separated into their parts. They're also geocoded, which means their latitude, longitude coordinate is created for each voter record where an address match is found. Sometimes there's non-standard addresses. That's more common on reservations where they could be 5 miles from the post office and that's their address. But every address that can be validated is, and that's stored in total vote that same way.
Can I ask,
Please.
who created this document? Is this one you created, Bruce?
That one I was going to get into in a moment. The
just wanted to-
auditors.
Brandon, a question.
Okay,
A
please.
couple of the comments on here is that some auditors saying they're bypassing the street master. Is that
You make
an option if those, if bypass street master, they're not going through that road today, that's not then, right?
Correct. If they bypass the street master, they don't have to go through Melissa Data. That would be the case if they have a non-standard address, or they do have the option to bypass the street master. The street master determines which precinct part or split a voter resides in, and that's based on the address. So if you're at 100 North Main and that matches up to the street master, that determines which districts that voter is in. So a precinct part contains a list of districts. That can be a ward, a city, a school, Senate, House, any other districts can be in that precinct part.
Now, Brandon, I know you don't have the luxury of looking at this document. Let me just read this off to you, and maybe it'll
Joe,
stimulate some
Can we find
conversation.
out who created this document?
Bruce did,
I,
right?
I don't think so.
no, this was, go ahead.
Where's this from?
Bob was at a meeting, so let me,
Are you talking about the one where the auditors had comments?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, what I did was I sent out an email to auditors, and auditors only, that would ask them about their experiences with the street master. And I think I got 21 responses back. We took the names off because there's some auditors out there that don't want to be associated with this, and I can't blame them. But they did give an answers, and there's some of them that didn't even give an answer because they want to remain at distance with this.
Okay.
But that's where I got it. And Sue, if you want to go through all the emails downstairs,
We
I'd
just
do that.
wanted to know who this document was from. There's no
It is-
name,
it
no
is-
nothing.
It is an edited document from the actual responses that came into my
Okay.
office.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
No.
Couldn't figure out what was going on here.
So, so Bob has a compendium here of, he basically took a survey of these auditors. I'll give you this copy when you leave too. This may be very helpful, I don't know. Maybe
Joel?
you're already addressing these issues. But, one of the biggest things that's discussed in this document is, I think it says somewhere like, 17 of 20 auditors responded that they're having problems with StreetMaster. And some of them don't even use it anymore because of these number of issues. So I'm a little, we're probably all a little concerned about that.
I would be too.
At the same time, you're saying, and I think in rural South Dakota, I could certainly identify with the fact that, there's not 911 addresses out there. It's, kind of wide open. But is this being addressed by Total Vote or B-Pro, or, are you tracking on any of these complaints? Is any progress being made? I'm just trying to start the discussion here. I'm not
Sure.
trying to sharpshoot you. It's-
If I can interject one thing.
Go for it.
I believe Bob listed this from we had all the auditors come to here on January 21st and had a meeting just to kind of visit with them, kind of see what they expect of us, and what they want in services. And we did talk about StreetMaster, and Brandon Johnson in our office, he was with the former Secretary of State's office, and he worked very closely with Total Vote and StreetMaster. And he did tell us that Secretary of State's office did not thoroughly train auditors on StreetMaster. They went through it very fast, and I think that is one of the main problems. And so we are gonna have a day meeting with the county auditors to train on StreetMaster for the morning session and Total Vote in the afternoon. And B-Pro staff will be there as well to go through and try and figure out, to just go through the whole training of it. And again, with them, there's a lot of new auditors that are new even on board coming for after the election that have not gone through training on this. So that's one thing that we're hoping can help fix some of the issues and problems that some of the auditors are having in StreetMaster. I think it goes back down to a training issue with them. Part of it anyway.
And time.
Yeah.
The implementation came right immediately after the 2012 general election, and it was a time when people were trying to learn the process. The Total Vote system was still being created at that time, components of it. And so as it went live, everybody was rushing to get it done, and that sometimes means you have to step back later, as you're doing now, and just kind of make sure everything is where it should be.
And the StreetMaster, overall, I would say, other than a handful of counties, it's all new. The counties don't know what it is. It had to be generated and then updated and maintained, and that's something they're not used to. The StreetMaster is simply every street segment within your county should be in that StreetMaster, and that ties to a precinct part, which determines which ballot you get, essentially. And if it's not correct, then you could get the wrong ballot.
And just to bring this in, you probably weren't privy to this discussion, Brandon, this happened early on during this, when this commission first started, was, one of the issues that we identified here in Minnehaha County and specifically in Sioux Falls was, and one of the candidates running for office had 2 of their supporters were sent the wrong ballot, right, Bruce?
Yes.
So that's kind of what stimulated some of that, and, through the years, we've seen, I think, a lot of that on a very small scale is where the wrong ballots are sent out or what have you. But that's kind of what was that is what one of the issues was. And then we had the auditor's office come in and, from Bob's office here, and tell us that they were having issues with data entry going into StreetMaster.
Right.
And it was resulting in these, I don't know the best way to describe it, but some streets were ending up just the opposite of where they should be? North was south, south was north?
I think that was actually the voters being added when they enter the address, and then it's sent out to Melissa Data. Melissa Data pulls all the address information from USPS, the Postal Service, so it should have the most up-to-date address information. But in some instances, and I remember talking to Heather about that, it did switch the north and the south. When it came back from Melissa Data, it separates those into the address parts, and that address part had been changed. It does notify on the side which pieces were changed by Melissa Data, and you can go back and correct it if you need to. But it's like Amazon or any other online retailer. When you enter your address, it says, is this the address you meant? This is the recommended address, or do you want to keep your original one?
So now, you said sometimes it comes back from Melissa with regard to Minnehaha County here. You
Right.
said it came back from Melissa, it was switched.
It was.
Was that, we're not, I don't know if we're trying to assign fault, but we're trying to isolate problems so that we can make corrections. Was that Melissa's fault?
That is Melissa's fault if we want to put blame somewhere, because for some reason they don't have that address in their system. So it came back with the next closest match, which
So
happened to be the other direction.
Right, so there is gonna be the possibility where we get this data back from Melissa, and we're still going to need to have county auditors' offices. Are they gonna have to be not troubleshooting, but,
They're gonna have to verify.
they're gonna have to verify that those address changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
In that vein, was a file sent down to the auditor's office here to say that we just changed 1,100 street addresses? Can you verify if these are correct?
We don't go through and change the addresses. They're changed when they're imported or entered. So as a new voter registration comes in, that address is entered and then validated with Melissa Data. At that time, it says these address parts were changed, if any.
So I'm going to step back on old data here, because it appears there were 3 primary dates of major uploads from the Minnehaha County AS400 into your total vote system.
Okay.
And that being December 14th of 2012, January 7th of 2013, and then another date in February of February 14th of 2013.
Okay.
There were some major changes that happened on those dates. And what I'm doing for everybody is I'm looking at this particular sheet that of showing some issues here. I call it stray data fragments that are attached to it. But yet this is all part of the question that ties into, we're making changes, and noticed some, on the same dates, we have 2 different file formats being done on these particular dates. We have corrupted data that flowed across the system somehow onto the other data based on the databases that tables that I was able to load out of your, out of Total Vote's system. So I'm trying to understand why the dates were all screwed up, and then why there was stray data beyond that, and then how that goes back and ties into the questions he was just asking. How are we going to audit this, and who was going to be able to audit this to say, when I looked at the AS400 information that all of this came out of, it appears to be correct. Sue did a great job maintaining an old, probably more of a flat file system that she had to work with. Now we're taking it out of it and bringing it up into Total Vote, and we have essentially, I forgot the total number of records, but somewhere in the area of 60,000 records that actually weren't in the system correct. There was one issue or another based on this. When it came out of this system, I would have thought you would have loaded this into some kind of a comparison table and built off of it, because the north, south, east, west were right in the old system. So sorry about that, but
No, you're talking the mainframe system. On December 14th, that week is when we imported all of the ST20 data, which the mainframe system used to submit or transport to ST20, which is a statewide repository. So that has the addresses, the voter information. So whatever's in ST20 should be like the mainframe, but we have no comparison to that. We wouldn't know that. And we're talking 66 counties of data, whether it's from a mainframe or whatever systems they may have, all transmitted to ST20. So they were instructed to transmit all of their data before that week so we could do a final data conversion and push it into total vote. That data conversion involved submitting every address for every voter to Melissa Data and returning back those parts wherever it could find them or match them, and then determining which street index or street master and precinct part that voter would reside in. Of course, we can't verify with every single county if their data is correct, so we have to rely on the counties to verify that as well. At the same token, Minnehaha County doesn't have a street master. They didn't have one in the previous system. Pennington County did, a few other counties did. We were able to import their street master data into Total Vote, but we had to generate the street master data for Minnehaha County. So that also means they need to go in, somebody needs to go into those counties that have a new street master and update that data to make sure their street master is correct. So there's a lot of work, and like Sue said, we're doing this in December, a month after a general election. Most auditors' offices are in hibernation because they just finished the election and they
No,
don't
they're
want to
getting the
touch
taxes
anything.
ready.
Yeah, yeah. So it really was not a big priority for most of the counties, and I don't know who to blame for that, but we had to import all the data. We had to convert it. We had to get it ready for a statewide file compared to a county-based file, and it needed to be validated. So we did that once in December, and we noticed, I believe in February or late January, maybe both, that some of Minnehaha's street master data was not there, so we had to regenerate that data and re-index those voters, and that would explain your 3 dates there.
So is it possible to apply a top-down fix to this? In the sense of if the auditor's office doesn't have enough people or the manpower, you could do that through the Secretary of State's office or with a contractor?
It's possible, yes. In larger counties like Minnehaha, they have access to GIS. They have access to all those road layers and all the districts, I would assume. I don't know that for sure. But Street Master is kind of an archaic solution to handling assigning a district or a precinct part to a voter. But it's really right now maybe the only solution, especially for a statewide system, because while Minnehaha and Pennington County may have a GIS department and up-to-date road layers and district layers, most of the other counties do not, and we don't have that data at a statewide level. So larger counties, we might be able to apply some updates and fixes to those, but overall, the smaller counties, they're not going to see any benefit from that.
Add a comment?
Go ahead.
Bruce,
Yes.
this is Julie.
Yes,
I-
Julie.
When it's ready, I can't hear all the conversation, but I would like to make a few comments.
I'll be sure to get you in.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Kia.
In the previous statewide voter file that we had prior to 2011, we created that so that the Secretary of State's office could not go in and change any voter registration record because the county is in charge of their voter registration files. And we were not able to go in and change anything on that record. And I don't know, I think now,
No, it's still the case.
they can't go in and change any record, they can't add or amend or anything, okay. So I don't think that would be an option for the Secretary of State's office to go in and do that.
But we could apply some sort of logic to the statewide file if we come up with one, if one's determined.
Before one of those updates is done, the reason, as I see it, first off, that prior to 2011, the state couldn't do anything is because Sue down here in the county auditor's office actually had her own computer down there keeping all the records, and the state just became a repository, a place to store the data.
Yep.
And so there wasn't any function that could happen at the state level because all the control was downstairs.
Correct.
In every county.
In
not-
every county.
Not just here.
Right. But I think there is something that says about the, in statute, that the auditor is in charge of the voter registration file.
And
So that might take a change for us to actually go in and change registration records. And it'd also be probably, something that Secretary Krebs would have to be involved in making that decision if she wanted our staff to be able to go in and change records.
well, the concern that I have is just what you were talking about, and then we'll get to Julie, is
On where the responsibility
we had
lies.
a series of dates when updates were done. It seems to be it's some kind of a systemic process that was run, and we had multiple updates running on the same table
Correct.
on those particular dates, and I'm getting a lot of stray data fragments in other fields caused by some of these updates. And as I went through it, there are these dates and these formats. So we were using two different processes apparently on those same days. And I'll go into this in more detail with you afterwards without boring everybody, but these are the questions. Your office is able to do some kind of updates on the total vote that are outside of the realm and auditing process of our county auditor who's responsible for this data.
Yeah, and we can do those updates in batch, because in the auditor's office, they're looking at a single voter record or a single street master record, and they can update them one at a time. But if there's a bulk update that needs to be done, we can certainly do that behind the scenes.
You can do that, but we also have a problem here, at least in the past, where the system was able to be updated by somebody outside of the auditor's office. And it caused some data issues, and we don't have any audit path to make sure.
We do have an audit path. We track every change to
Well,
the voter record.
I understand change logs in a SQL server and what was done, but Bob Litz and Clay County, Lincoln County, Union County, Pennington County are totally out of this update process because somebody outside of their office is actually doing it without any kind of sign off to say, we're going to make these changes using this formula at this time.
And I don't know if that's true or not. I can. go
That's
back
what I
and
would
look at
like to
it.
find out.
I keep every email, so I can find that out.
So Julie has some questions, and
I have
thank
one
you,
more
Julie.
comment before,
Oh,
before
yes,
Julie
Julie.
makes a comment.
Yes.
The other issue with total vote and with the system it came from, it used to be a bottom-up system, which means every county had their own voter registration system. And now it's a top-down, so it's a statewide voter registration system everybody uses. What that creates is a lot of duplicates. So a voter could move within the city of Sioux Falls, but to different counties, and have 2 or 3 different voter IDs because they've moved a couple times. And what happens is when we import all that data into one system, a top-down system, we have to go through and remove all the duplicates. And we don't remove those in particular. We have a process that identifies probable, possible duplicates. And the counties went through that process in 2013 before they did a purge, and I know that was another topic on your list, to identify and notify the duplicates that these records will be combined unless we hear back from you, or I don't know the exact process, but there was a process built into Total Vote to identify and remove duplicates, to eliminate or try to eliminate bad data.
Okay.
I'm done.
Julie, please.
Oh, yes. What I'd like to comment on is from the very beginning, what we need to clarify is that the Total Vote is a repository of all the different counties. So it is a one format input. Every county auditor still inputs their county information. And it fits within some parameters, but county auditors can still override everything in total vote to input a voter any way they want. And total vote has to accept that. The state office nor total vote programmers don't do anything with loading or maintaining the voters. So you can have total inconsistencies even though it's one system. Now, because most counties did not have a street master, the way the street master within total vote was prepared was it took the information that was already uploaded from each county and prepared a parameter of a street master. It wasn't ever intended nor represented that it was a complete, accurate street master until the auditor's office of each county manually went through it and reloaded any corrections that they needed to make. Now, when you go from a manual system to a computerized street master that's formulated off of those parameters, you're always going to have errors. Because if the auditor, his or herself, does not care to update and keep up and maintain or even use a computerized street master or one that is prepared house by house like ours was, you're not going to have the consistency that you're expecting if you're forced by the total vote to put something in. You can override anything that Melissa's system puts in there to total vote. And there are a lot of counties that because, and we even have them in Pennington, that they don't, new areas aren't addressed by Melissa automatically. You have to go in and load new addresses. That's where ours comes from. We have to go in and load the new addresses, and then Melissa will finally catch up. So you have those issues with, the street master, and a lot of counties know their information. They don't need to look at a street master for ward and precinct information. In counties as large as Pennington County, we have to have a street master or we have to have a manually gridded map because we can't remember our addresses. That could be your issue of why some counties are using the street master and some aren't. We have to because we can't memorize it. Smaller counties didn't need to do it. They don't care that it's standardized into ST dot for street, or the way Melissa likes boulevard, or the way we put in East North Street versus East Boulevard North. I mean, they're completely different. You have to relearn when you're actually using a standardized street master. That's where a lot of your issues. I can't answer the south, north, east, west. But whether the county uses total votes calculated street master or not is not total votes problem. And it is not, the voter registrations are, again, not designed so candidates can pull out their information easily. The Freedom of Information Act says that we have to have our voter registration files, and that is to conduct elections. We do not have to program it so that candidates or political committees can easily pull out any information from government. Is it nice? I would say so. Does it make sense from a candidate's perspective, which I am one? You bet it does. And once I started pulling lists and looking at them from a candidate standpoint, it makes sense why you would make some changes. But especially in the smaller jurisdiction and counties, their candidates, they don't care what their street master looks like because they mail all the post office boxes. So you got two different uses of a voter registration system, and one is by the candidates and others, and that is not what our system is for. Our system is to vote and register people in the correct precinct per county. So if Lincoln County calls a precinct something different than Minnehaha County, there's nothing total vote, and there's nothing any other government can make the change to, other than if Lincoln County and Minnehaha County auditors get together and determine that they want to call it the same thing. There is nothing the Secretary of State's office can do. There is nothing Total Vote can do. Total Vote only is there to deposit our information into. And when you're trying to convert the individuality and the care level of 66 different county auditors into a system, there is a lot of thought process changing that has to go through. And I don't think we're through it yet. You can tell that because there are county auditors not using the Street Master. They don't need to. They probably never will. I can't answer the question of what happens when data is converted from one to the other, but we still, with the detail that we had with our Street Master, which came from a mainframe into Total Vote, we had some issues, but nothing compared to what anybody else had as a county, because we'd already worked a lot of those stagnant issues, or not stagnant, but those issues out with uniformity within our addresses. Did we still have to make changes? We had to make changes to conform to Melissa. Do we necessarily like Melissa? No, not necessarily, but we conform to it to keep our Street Master accurate. No other county auditor has to make that decision. So you're never, because the Secretary of State's office is not the voter registrar of the state of South Dakota, you will not be able to ever make them completely accurate and completely consistent with everything else in the state, because you're dealing with 66 different offices that do input. So to blame the Secretary of State's office really for anything in to do with the voter registration, other than trying to get Total Vote programming to meet 66 different county auditors' likes, dislikes, it's not their responsibility. We are just lucky that they did a Total Vote system that we can get a lot closer to a uniform system.
Julie, Julie, the question that I was having was, in the process, when there's an update that needs to be performed statewide, or just for Minnehaha County, or just for Sioux Falls, or just for Rapid City, I was asking Brandon if there was a system to actually sign off on the update that needs to be done, that somebody in your office in Rapid City could actually look at what they want to change and how they want to change it to before they hit the button that commits the data change. So that way it isn't just a systemic change that might work in Gan Valley but won't work in Rapid City.
I guess I don't know what change Pennington would make.
No, what I'm saying is there would be a change in the programming or in the way data is stored at the state level. And
yes, in Total Vote. You can't just make a change just for Pennington.
No, there would be some kind of a statewide. Brandon was talking about doing some statewide updates for Melissa and other things, and we don't know what kind of changes might happen in the future. So what I'm asking, so that we don't run back into the same problem that we've now appear to have tamed and in control, if there was some kind of an update that comes in the future is there any kind of a process that maybe from the Secretary of State's office gets funneled down to the counties, or so that the people who are actually responsible for this data can say, yep, that looks like a good change, or nope, we found this little problem over here, and so that we can have somewhere to temporarily store the change before it's committed into the final table.
And I actually have a process.
Yeah, and that would, Bruce, that would be a computer total vote thing that I wouldn't have any I don't have the knowledge of how that would work. But I do know that when program changes are made, we know as county auditors. Because number one, we've either requested it and they've kind of vetted it through, or yes, they said, oh yes, we've heard about this and we have several counties that want this, so we're going to make this type of unilateral change.
And if I
But I don't know how that process is done. I don't know when it is done, and but it's never really affected any of our data.
Go ahead, Keita.
I believe too, when the previous statewide voter file was put in place and the election management system and this one, I believe even the total vote, there was a group of auditors that did testing and kind of went through to try and find maybe things that need to be changed and everything before they go live. So we do include auditors in big changes, and even if there's like little changes that are requested, those would be sent out to all the county auditors to let them know that this is a change we're making and requested the auditors, or something that we've discovered that maybe would fix some other issues.
Well, the reason I brought this issue up was when I have these data issues that I found, and there was something that had happened somewhere on these particular dates to cause this kind of an issue, and I wanted to find out in the future, because we can't go back and, who cares at this moment where the problem actually came from originally, but did it affect anything else? And if another one of these updates into some kind of an overall system, will there be written notification to Bob Litz or down to Clay County or to Julie Pearson in Rapid City or the auditor in Gan Valley that says, we have this change coming, do you see that it's going to cause any problem for you in the way your screens lay out, as a data table, as an Excel spreadsheet, however you want to show it before you hit the commit button and move that temporary data up into the final database?
And we do have a test system, which is somewhat of a mirror of the production system, to go through those processes and make sure the testing group can go through and everything works how it should. Not just the change that was made, but any of the other processes that may have been touched.
Well, I'm going back to, was there a test system to look at how this data, for the tens of thousands of Sioux Falls records that were worked on and they were incorrect when they got done. And we had to go through a series of elections here in Minnehaha County until the problem was finally addressed.
Well, those data conversions, that's part of the original data conversion in my memory.
Yes,
we did that
they
in
were.
December, and a month later we're doing it again or modifying that. So we're still just newly live into the new system. For the street master, we do provide a report of all the suspect street segments that look like they're overlapping or missing voters or anything like that. We provide that to the county, and then they go through and update the street segments as that have been identified in that report. And then with their go-ahead, we do a push to update in bulk all of the street segments and the voters tied to those street segments that they changed.
I understand that part of it, but and I hate to belabor this point, but what I'm trying to get at is we have to have audit processes, and I'm not hearing that we are addressing at this point an audit process so Bob Litz or Julie Pearson don't get blamed for having messed up data files again. And that's what I'm asking. Is there going to be, or could there be, some kind of a audit process that says, Bob gets this, and Heather downstairs can go through this list and say, yep, that all looks good, or no, I'm seeing some issues here, and they need to be addressed before the commit button puts it into the permanent record.
Well, the commit button would be coming from the county auditor saying, Brandon, yeah,
But-
that report, everything that you sent to me, good to go.
Yep.
Go ahead. I mean,
And that
auditors
would-
are the ones that are making that final decision.
But what I'm understanding from so far the discussions that happened in the past, during the updating process, the uploading, then the updating process, the county auditor may have been left out of the loop on actually verifying that the data was correct. And that's what I'm asking. And
They shouldn't have been left out of the loop because, I mean, we imported data, put the system live, and they're supposed to go in and validate it.
and this will, and I'll get off this point here in a moment, but, I can go back and actually see up until September 10th of 2013, there was still some process running that was actually putting data in incorrectly. And so, and that's where this one particular file segment that I had was, that was the cutoff date on one of the files. And I saved that file, but that told me that from December, December 14th of 2012 through September 10th of 2013, we were still running a process that was actually moving data around in total vote incorrectly.
I don't know if that's true or not.
And it looks like that's been taken care of now through all of the repairs that Julie Pearson sent somebody out here to help Bob clean up things downstairs, and, through the processes, it looks like most of that's been cleaned up now, but still it created a lot of heartache and headache and voter frustration because things just weren't working right here. And
So you're looking at Sioux Falls or Minnehaha data?
all I had to base what I'm talking about today was on the city election, because we were involved in a lot of citizen efforts during that time period, and we were trying to verify that we had enough petition signatures and doing all this work. So I had this data, and being a data miner, I was just kind of looking at it and trying to see, why things weren't making sense. I was involved in finding out that the north, south, east, west situation was a mess, because one of my candidates that I was actually verifying petitions for, if it would have been strict rules on addresses, she wouldn't have been able to get on the ballot, because it showed that this person that signed wasn't in her district.
What showed? What showed?
The signature,
No.
The signature on the petition. In some states, as I've gone through this, if the address on the petition doesn't match exactly what's on the record, that's the problem. South Dakota and in Sioux Falls, it's not a problem.
Then that's
But
really not
that's what caught my attention, that there was a problem in the way the data was laying out and the data was presented. And so that's what opened my eyes to this, and I started asking questions and trying to get it resolved. It didn't affect them getting on the ballot, but it shows there's a problem with the data.
What exactly is the problem? Is it the north, south, east, west, or is it something else?
There's multiple things.
Okay, you have a sentence in here that says, "We learned to work with the hundreds of bad addresses we found," in regard to...
We were, in our situation...
What do you mean exactly by...
In our situation, we were trying to set up to do some mailings.
But what do you mean by bad addresses?
The north, south, east, west. We found...
That was it?
That was the start of it.
Okay.
And then we found out that in this process, it looked like they were in different precincts. And so we're like trying to understand how all of this stuff was done, and we were looking at multiple different things in here and trying to adjust to inconsistencies.
Are you saying that the address they wrote down on the petition did not match the address in the voter file?
Yes.
Okay, that's allowable.
No, and it is, and I understand that.
Allowable. So
And-
that isn't a bad address.
No, but what it did, we knew that these people lived, and I'm just going to use 100 South Main. I'm just going to use that address. And the state's database, the total vote, showed them living at 100 North Main. And so what we were trying to do, and knowing how some of the city wards are, you know, kind of notched in and out of neighborhoods, it could put them in the northwest versus the central versus the northeast, or, you know, just in the way that this moved things around. And so we were trying to build these voter lists. And that's when I started to discover the inconsistencies. And so that's appears to have been dealt with now with all the hard work that's been done to straighten up, physically straighten up the files back to what they were originally for these people that have been living in their same homes for 20, 30, 40 years. So now they're back where they need to be, and I just want to make sure it doesn't happen again without somebody signing off before somebody hits the commit button and all of a sudden Melissa changes a whole bunch of addresses again, or some kind of a system. Does that make sense?
I'm still not clear on, when I asked you, was the problem with these hundreds of bad addresses, was it the northeast, southwest? You said, well, that was the start of it, but then you agreed that a lot of them were because they had written down a different address than is in the file.
No, the address they wrote down was the address that should have been in the state's database.
Even
The petition address was correct, and that's...
Was it entirely north, south, east, west issues, or?
Yes.
Okay, you're saying you had hundreds
Yeah, and
of bad
it
addresses.
turned out with the current file that I've gotten from just this week, you know, I verified it again, that I do show right now 1,087 of those addresses have been corrected to where these people actually live. And a few weeks ago, I went and pulled some more data, and I found a few issues, and Heather in the county auditor's office was able to go in and fix those when I found that there were still a few errors. Because if, based on the people living in there, I matched them up to all kinds of different ways that I have to match up where these people actually live that showed north, south, east, west issues. And that was, you know, primary. Then I've also found where they still don't even have north, south, east, west put into their address, into that street address field. And I'm gonna give that to Bob to have Heather fix those particular ones I found. So there's still some issues with some of these things that that still need to be fixed, but that can affect which ballot these people are given if we go to a totally systemic process of assigning legislative districts based on the street master. Well, I tried to use a street master, and the street master was actually following the address that Melissa had given it. So all of a sudden, the street master, I was having the same address having multiple street masters. So that's why I got into that side of it, trying to understand how these different pieces work together. Does that make, does anybody else have any more?
Well, it makes sense to me, but I understand the system too.
Now, Brandon, you said the state can't make any changes to a voter record, correct?
Correct, or the street master.
There's a comment on here on the document that Bob Letts prepared that they would like to know why the state is making changes to our files without consulting with us first. So we can't make any changes at all. Okay.
But if I understand that question, that kind of ties back into what I was asking on these particular dates, and maybe that particular auditor was asking in a different way the same question that I had. Was there's a systemic process that you have to do, or the server does at some point.
There's no process that the server runs.
And possibly that could be back to when you were doing matches with Melissa or one of the addressing systems. I don't know in that particular situation, but what you were saying about the matching it up with the Melissa data actually makes sense on this part. And when it goes out, and you may have multiple procedures for doing some of these functions, and maybe some fields aren't structured the same.
No, To get all the data into Total Vote in the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, we imported 700 and some thousand records, voter records, ran each one of those through Melissa Data, and took each updated address that Melissa Data provided and put it in the voter record. Can we verify that those are the correct addresses? No, we don't have any way to do that. The counties would have to do that. At the same time, we also generated street master data from those Melissa updated voter records and all the possible combinations of street segments from the voter file for each county.
Go ahead, Sue.
Back when we, before we went to the state system, we used the National Change of Address vendors to update our file. And every time we did that, we would get a report back of, I think they were called standardized addresses. Addresses that the system had changed. And it would give you the voter identification, the information we entered, and what it changed it to. And I think that's kind of what we're asking for. Does the Melissa system...
It does.
So there is a report that could come back to auditors so they could check and verify it to see what had been changed.
I think he said the auditor gets a report.
The auditor
They
does
see it on the screen, and we also store,
see it on the screen where?
when you add a voter and you enter their address or
Yeah,
pull it in for driver's licensing,
I think
you
it's more,
validate it
I
with
think it's
Melissa.
more the, the uploading, the original stuff, and
Right, the original
anytime you
stuff.
do a mass upload, and which I think still conceivably could happen, it's obviously, if you enter an address right away, it standardizes it, so you can see it right on screen, so that should not be a problem.
But when it standardizes it, it also validates it.
Yeah,
So
but they should
that's
be
where
able
it's
to see.
changing from north to south or something like that.
When the auditor is entering it, they should
They
be
do
able to see it, but it's kind of those mass,
Like a mass conversion.
The initial
a
data
mass
conversion.
conversion. If you ever have to do a mass conversion again, do you get that report back?
Thank you.
We
That's
could.
the exactly thing that I'm.
That's what you've been asking,
We
right?
could,
Yes.
yes.
I think that would be something that would be very helpful to have, was on paper,
Yes,
here's
I
a
agree.
list of what you sent, and here's the variations, here's what we changed. I
And-
think
but
that's exactly what we're getting at.
We
Yes.
You can match and go back and
Yes.
look
We won't necessarily know what changed, because the initial data from ST20 is one field for the address, so
Oh, sure.
100 North Main.
Yeah.
We don't have it in parts, so we can't tell which section changed, so every address changed.
But NCOA was able to give us that list. Every time we did an NCOA update, and we did it every 2 years before we did the purge process.
Yep.
It gave us that report, and there might be 1,000, and there are places in this county, like I know at one time in Brandon, we added the north, south, east, west to all the streets. Well, NCOA wasn't updated. It didn't recognize those north, south, east, west, and it said, no, that's not right. You don't need to have that address, the directional in it. We left it in because we knew sooner or later it was coming. But that seems to be the same kind of thing that potentially is happening here. And we had a printout, they're still down in the auditor's office, I'm quite sure, that showed the changes it had made.
And that's it.
That would have been
You've said it a
helpful.
lot better than I.
That's what you've been
Yes.
asking for, I think.
Yes, and
That makes sense.
there has to be some way for Heather downstairs, Julie out in Rapid City, even Bob sitting in his office saying, oh, we have a process going to happen on 2 weeks from tonight, and we're going to be doing this, and it looks like here's 100 North Main, this is 100 South Main, and, is that an acceptable change for 1,000 records or 110,000 records?
We don't have any of those processes anymore.
And what we're asking is,
Melissa does, though.
If one ever comes
yes,
up.
and we can't do it one by one. There has to be some way
It's
to look
only
at
one
it.
by one now. As voter records come in, registration records come in, they get validated manually.
And now
one by
what,
one.
and now what we're
never going
asking
to do a
is
mass
in the
conversion.
future,
If we ever change the voter file for any reason, there could be a time where we'd have a mass conversion again.
And if
at
that
point, we would
happens,
have to make sure that we have
We can provide
some
a
type
report
of
like that.
documentation to give to each auditor showing what was changed.
But if, what you're saying is if Bob is convinced, that computer is in exactly the wrong spot. If Bob is convinced that the file is correct now, nothing should corrupt the data you have in it now,
Correct,
because nothing gets changed other than new stuff coming in,
correct.
right?
And do you have a policy in place that's going to stop any changes from happening on a systemic level?
We don't have any changes happening on a
But
systemic
if,
level.
so, but through the Secretary of State's office, could there be a policy put into place that says there are no systemic issues unless all of the auditors sign off that they have actually seen what the changes are going to be?
The only
I mean,
thing-
it could be just adding a field.
The only thing I can think of that a systemic change would have to happen is in 2020 when the census comes out and we have to do
Move legislative
redistricting.
districts.
Yeah.
Then we're gonna have to do a mass update. And so at that point, we would provide a report of everything that's changed. What will change there are district boundaries, the relationship to the street master, and the voters that are in those street master segments. And at that point, yes, a report like that would be very helpful.
And that's what I'm asking for. I mean, that is a major change.
That is,
And all of the auditors, and currently, we're about 5 years away from really having to buckle down and figure out how that's going to be done. And so I'm asking if that's something that would save the Bobs and the Julies and the Sues in their county auditors' offices a lot of hassle.
it would, I agree.
So, I don't know, did we exhaust this topic to everybody's?
Don't know.
I appreciate this, Brandon. I'll talk to you about it some more if you'd like, and go into it in more detail. We did have one additional part of this segment, was just discussing the ERM reports, and how that process works. And does anybody have any more questions? We did discuss this once before, but we wanted to find out if there was some additional. And Bob, did you have some more?
I did have one more thing that I thought I wanted to show folks. And I know I'm not up by the microphone there, Tony, but when you deal with the post office, and before every election, we'll send out like voter acknowledgement cards if somebody
Monty, could you
registers.
bring the boxes over that he wants to show us, and just over to the podium here, and then Bob could come back to the microphone. Thank you, Monty.
But the reason I'm doing this is I just wanted to demonstrate anytime you're dealing with the post office, you're going to have some issues. And these are voter acknowledgement cards, and then there's some cards also that I sent out to voters telling them if there was a precinct change or when it closed down and I moved it. After the primary, we threw them all out. And this is collected since the general election. And I was just downstairs looking at some of these cards that are on Heather's desk, and some of them are still coming back from the primary. So they've been out floating in the postal system since last June. And I don't think there's anything we're going to do about this here, because we have to this is qualified pre-sort, and in order to get our bulk rate, we have to use that postal system that they like. And but this is a result. I think this just kind of brings it home as this is part of the problem that we're talking about here is things getting, and I don't know, some of these people might have moved without telling us, but a lot of the voter acknowledgement cards are from voter registrations that we did recently. So I don't have an answer for you there. I just thought that demonstrated kind of what's going on out there with the post office.
So, Bob, you take these cards and you don't do anything with that voter information until you get the card back, or is there a cutoff time where you go and invalidate or inactivate that record?
On the voter acknowledgement cards, when we upload our information to Secretary of State, I understand that the card is generated out of there now. I think that's what we opted to.
It currently has, the previous administration started doing that. We're making a policy change to put that back on the county auditors.
Oh, okay. And then, so that's one form of what goes on. But when I'll do a mailing to tell all the voters in a precinct if I have moved their location from one school or to a church or whatever it is, I'll send all those voters that are in our data file one of those cards. And, obviously if the data file that I'm getting isn't correct, and then by the time these guys run it through their postal, however they do it, I think there's an excessive amount of cards. Maybe not. I mean, maybe this was the way it's always been, but I'm always shocked at the number of things that we get back in the mail.
Anybody have any other questions for Bob? Go
Just to
ahead.
follow up on that, there's really two kinds of cards you're talking about.
Yes.
You're talking about the voter acknowledgement
Yep.
card, the registration acknowledgement card, and the notice you send when you change a precinct. And they're really two very different things. When a voter registers, you send them an acknowledgement card. If that comes back undeliverable, then that voter is supposed to go through the confirmation process, it's called. We used to call it the purge. But if they don't, so you send them a second mailing, and then if they don't respond to that, they become inactive and have to reaffirm their address when they come to vote the next time. So it isn't just that they come back and they get dropped in a box. The ones that were sent out to validate the person's address that they registered at are followed up on. And so that, just in case anybody thinks, are people registering at bogus addresses?
No.
That there is a process for following up on that. If they've voted with the same address for 20 years and have moved across town and they keep voting, then he might get back one of those cards, but you don't do anything with it because that's just an informational card he sends out.
Apparently we can move on to the next topic, and what I wanted to go into is this: was there any old business that anybody wanted to bring up from previous meetings? And that being the case, is there any new business? Anything anybody wanted to bring up? Robert, you were asking us to discuss the possibility of our finished report.
Yeah, Bruce, you and I had talked the last couple of days that I think we most likely will need one additional meeting of this group as one of the results to come out of this as the committee was appointed by the county commission and given its charge was to produce a final report. And we had tentatively set that at March 6th, 2 Fridays from now, 10 a.m. And I think at that point, the agenda item on that day would be to approve a final report. This morning, just before the meeting started, I sent out a draft of a report to all of you for your review, and at this point, it really reflects the conversations and discussions at the meetings you have had up to this point. Based on the discussion and the information presented today, I am going to be leaning on you heavily for your feedback as far as how much of this additional information data that you want to be part of this report. As the committee, this is your report, obviously. But in the draft that I had put together up to this point, I again used the discussions that we'd had on previous meetings, as well as keeping in mind the charge from the county commission when this committee was formed of taking a look at the issues that came up during the general election and offering any thoughts, recommendations related to that. So the draft final report that you're looking at right now is fairly narrow, confined to that subject matter there, and it will be up to really the 7 of you how much of that additional information to bring into that, and I expect we will have quite a number of back and forth conversations over the next couple of weeks getting that in final form, and we will obviously the plan will be that once I'll do my best to share information quickly with all of you to a point that once you're happy with it, we could post that on the committee website and offer the public a chance to look at that prior to coming in and finalizing it. That's a lot of me talking. If there's any questions you have or any other direction from me, I would be happy to take that. And again, the draft that you're looking at right now is very rough. I even hesitate to call it a rough draft. It's a lot of blocks of discussion from previous meetings that were set into some possible findings or recommendations that were offered up early on, and I grouped it according to those recommendations. So if there's additional information that you want me to put in, different categories, different really other formats, that is, again, it's your report, and I will look for that direction.
Does anybody have any further thoughts for Robert at this point? Thank you, Robert. I think we're good, and I'm going to call the meeting adjourned.
Bye.
Thank you, Julie.